how is the war in Ukraine reflective of the values that St. Petersburg Forum is trying to put forward, to defend, to underscore?
Very easily. Directly, in fact, there is a direct relation to what I've been talking about. I said that security of one country cannot be ensured at the expense of security of other country. And since the beginning of the 1990s, for decades, we've been hearing that there would be no NATO's expansion to the east. And we've had 5 or 6 rounds of expansion. Despite all our calls not to do this, those were ignored, and definitely those are rudiments of the old, if not to say ancient, neocolonial policy, well, upgraded, of course, given the current context, but nonetheless, this is the action from the position of power. Those are the actions that do not take into account the interests of Russia. As to Ukraine, again, this is action from the position of power, whatever was happening there. It is a bloody anti-constitutional coup that happened in Ukraine. And again, this is acting from the position of power. And previous U.S. administration directly stated that they spent billions of dollars to support the coup. Well, obviously, it was not mentioned in public, but still. And our action aimed at protecting part of the population that considered that it had cultural and historic ties with the Russian people. I'm referring to the people living in the Crimea. And then there were some attempts on our part to resolve the situation in the southeast of Ukraine, in Donetsk and Luhansk. We made these efforts, but again, our, in this case, ideological opponents, as I could label them, attempted to act from a position of force. They started military operations in Lugansk and Donbass. It was not us who started the military operations. And after the coup, the part of the Ukrainian population rejected the outcomes of the coup and rejected those who made this coup happen. Well, they became targets of the military operations. We attempted to address the situation in a peaceful manner, to somehow mend the situation, but our partners, quote unquote, well, it turned out that they started this whole coup just to pump up Ukraine with weapons and to continue combat. In the end, this forced us to recognize independence of the two republics. Look, it took us 8 years to do this. We tried to negotiate, but we were forced to recognize their independence, and then we started supporting them, including providing military support to put an end to the war unleashed by our opponents in the West. And those who they lean upon in Ukraine, those are neo-Nazis and ultranationalists. So whatever that is linked to this tragedy unfolding in Ukraine is not an outcome of our action. This is an outcome of the action of those who are not ready to embrace the global changes happening in the world.
Mr. President, I'm in no position to challenge the narrative you put forward. Let's say this is the baseline of what the reality is. Let's assume this is a reality. Your army is advancing beyond the 4 areas that are considered Russian by Moscow. So what's your end game? How deep is your army going to go, and for what effect?
Вы сказали по поводу
You said about the 4 regions that we consider ours. Well, on many occasions I did mention that Russian and Ukrainian peoples are the same people, and in this sense, the entire Ukraine is ours. But look, we look at the realities on the ground, and obviously there are people, there are many such people in a neighboring country who seek sovereignty and independence, and I wish them all the best. I mean, we never, ever challenged their right, the right of the Ukrainian people to independence and sovereignty. Having said that, the grounds on which Ukraine became independent and sovereign were spelled out in the Declaration on Independence of 1991. And it stated very clearly that Ukraine is a non-nuclear neutral state and not party of any blocs. I think it would be good to get back to those core values based on which Ukraine obtained its sovereignty and independence. Second, from the very beginning, when the conflict became really hot, we suggested to the Ukrainian leadership to cease all the conflicts. We suggested that we withdraw our troops from the territories, and they withdraw their troops from the territories where people are not ready to embrace the new regime and they want to live independently or become part of the Russian Federation. They said no. And again, those are not political decisions. And now the logic of combat comes into play. The military look at where they can better advance, where they can channel their troops to achieve the best outcomes with lowest possible casualties. And this is how troops advance. You know, we have an old saying, or story, or rule rather. Whenever the boot of Russian soldier stands, it becomes ours. Look, I would hate the statement to be over-militaristic or be viewed as over-militaristic, but at every single stage of the unfolding process, and I stress this just for you to understand, and this is truth. I mean, at every single stage of the unfolding process, we suggested to those with whom we were in contact in Ukraine, we suggested to stop. We suggested that we should negotiate, because this purely military logic may result in a situation when the whole thing would aggravate, and we will have to negotiate starting from worse positions. And this happened several times. I would not go into detail now. And the witnesses to this, to our suggestions, are active politicians from other countries, and thanks God they are alive and healthy. But whenever we suggested something, they would go from Moscow to Kiev and then would tell us, look, they tell us that we are agents of the Kremlin and we wash our hands. I won't deal with this. So each time we heard no, no, no. And we said time and again, let's do it, let's negotiate. It's going to be worse for you. No. Why? Well, because those who are guided by old neo-colonial principles, including and primarily Europe, they thought that they would crush Russia, would destroy Russia, and would feast on it. That's exactly why, and I'm confident, and that's exactly why former Prime Minister Mr. Johnson, and I think this happened due to suggestions by the former U.S. administration. Biden's administration came to Ukraine and suggested that they should not reach an agreement with Russia. But the agreement was on the table during the Istanbul negotiations. We reached a consensus on almost all issues, and we had just to finalize the document. We had just to meet with the head of the regime at that time and put an end to this process. But now, Mr. Johnson came and, with the support of the then U.S. administration, came and he talked Ukraine out of signing the agreements, trying to achieve a strategic defeat of Russia in the battlefield. Well, in the end, new territories found themselves under our control. The Russian army advances every day along the whole edge of the battle area. Look, they incurred into the Kursk region. Well, they lost 76,000 troops there. It's a catastrophe, it's a disaster. 76,000. In the end, we drove them out from that region, but they started to create threats for us along the whole border with Ukraine in two neighboring regions. You know, they lack personnel, and now we have to create a security zone along the border, and they divert their troops there, the troops that they are lacking in other areas. 47% is the current staffing level of their combat units. In fact, they lose their combat worthiness. With their own hands, they extended the battle lines for another 2,000 kilometers. And as I said, they started to create threats for us along our border and another 1,600 kilometers. You know, they spread their troops thinly. From the military standpoint, it's silly, it's stupidity. They create problems of their own, and we have to respond somehow. You said that there are some other territories. Yes, of course. Look at the national border. As I said, they incurred into the Kursk region, and they committed a lot of crimes there, including crimes against the civilian population. And we kicked them out with significant losses, and now we have to create security areas along the borders because they keep attacking from there. They use artillery, they use UAVs.
How deep is the security zone?
In the
Sumy region, it's about 10 to 12 kilometers, in some places 8 to 10 kilometers, and then there's the city of Sumy, the regional center. But we do not have this task of taking Sumy, but I do not exclude this. I do not rule this out. Now, why are we doing all this? Well, because they're creating threats for us. They keep shelling our border areas, our border regions, and this is an outcome of their ungrounded and ill-thought-through actions. The only objective was of political nature, just to demonstrate that they can do something, that they can obtain something from their foreign sponsors. And look, they've gotten some $250 billion. Well, not enough. Give us more and more and more. And one half is being stolen, if not more. That's why we found ourselves in those regions. And again, this is an outcome of the standoff and the nature of it.